Tin from Can here. Today we're looking at transmission cooler for the Prado 150. So why might you consider a transmission cooler for your vehicle? A cooler helps lower the temperatures in your transmission. Transmission oil, automatic transmission oil, is ideally wanting to operate at around the 95-degree mark or a little bit lower. When you get above that, you run the risk of burning the fluid and introducing other compounds into the oil, which might damage your transmission. So anytime you're under a high load, you will see higher temperatures. So things like towing, which is an obvious one. If you've got lots of accessories on your vehicle and other accessories that might block the airflow and reduce the amount of cooling you're going to get. If you're expecting to do a lot of sand driving or really tough, difficult four-wheel driving, that can definitely increase the temperature of your transmission oil. If you've had a tune, in which case the motor is outputting more power, that power has to go through your transmission, so it will increase the temperature of your transmission fluid. If you've actually changed the oil in your transmission because you've done that preventative maintenance, you might have noticed that the oil is not that nice red color anymore, and it might be a bit brown and burnt, which means you've got extra compounds in there that could damage your transmission. Now, if you've installed a scan gauge and you've got the codes up to see your transmission temperatures, you're seeing the temperatures consistently above 100 degrees, might consider a transmission cooler. So the kit we've put together, we are including the True Cool core. So we decided to choose this core because it has a few extra features that aren't commonly found on other cores. It's got a cold bypass along the top. What that does is in colder climates, it allows the fluid to not get cooled down and bypass so that the temperature comes up quicker. And the general build quality is up there. It's a much more sturdier construction. It's not as fragile as a normal sort of fin style construction, which makes it a much stronger, more durable product. So if you're doing lots of rough roads and so forth, it's a better product. I also like how it's powder coated. It helps with the thermal efficiency and also makes it look like a very factory install and just disappears in the engine bay. Even little features like the machined hose tails, it's just a very well-made core. Now with the kit, we supply all the hoses, the hose clamps and bracketry to position that core to give you plenty of room to install other accessories in the front there, and I'll show you later. Now all the bracketry is actually powder coated stainless steel, so very durable and built to last. We've also included a bit of hose management to help you route those hoses to make sure you don't get damaged. So this is a little bit of hose management. So that's what's included in the kit. The other thing you'll need is top-up fluid. Now, you're going to need about another 300 ml of fluid to fill up all the hoses and the actual cooler core. Now, we recommend potentially sticking with the Toyota transmission fluid, or you can substitute that with your favorite equivalent fluid from any reputable manufacturer.
I thought it'd be good to simplify and explain how the components of the cooling system work and how they're plumbed up, how they're currently plumbed up, and how we will be adding a cooler in series. So we have our transmission, automatic transmission here. It's got an inlet and outlet, and the fluid gets pumped to the other areas of the vehicle, one being the radiator tank, which is where the factory cooler sits. And the factory cooler sits inside the radiator, which when you're at operating temperature is 90-degree coolant from your engine. So you're cooling down your transmission with 90-degree coolant. So the way it's plumbed up currently in a vehicle without a transmission cooler is the outlet, the hot fluid, goes into the bottom of the radiator tank. So that fluid might be 100 degrees all the way up to 130 degrees, goes into the radiator at 90 degrees, and it comes out the top. We'll use green because it's a little bit cooler. Comes out the top and goes back into the transmission. So that's the current cooling system that you'll have in your standard vehicle. We have our auxiliary cooler over here, so I'll rub all this out and I'll show you how we will plumb that one up. Okay, we want to install an auxiliary cooler, and we want to install it in series. Now the recommended practice is to have the auxiliary cooler, which is this new cooler over here, to be mounted in series with the current cooler, but after the factory cooler. So I'll show you how we do that. So the fluid needs to go into the factory cooler first. So as per normal, it's plumbed into the bottom of the radiator tank cooler. Now when it comes out the top, it's cooled down a little. So we want to attach that to the new cooler. So what I'll do is we'll go this way, jump over, and we go into the bottom of the auxiliary cooler. Now once it's gone into the bottom of the auxiliary cooler, the advantage of the auxiliary cooler, the new cooler, is it's got ambient air running over the fins to help cool down that fluid. So you've got 20-degree air cooling down the oil, so you're going to get a much bigger reduction in oil temperature through this auxiliary cooler. Now once it's gone through the bottom, through the top, we send that back to the transmission. So we got the first stage of cooling through the radiator tank, comes back out the top into the auxiliary cooler, and then gets cooled by ambient air rushing over the fins, then gets sent back to the transmission. Let's have a chat about the bypass feature in the TrueCool cores. Now, the fluid in your transmission is designed to operate at a range of temperatures, and ideally you want it to be around 75 to 95 degrees. When the fluid is coming up to temperature and is cooler, your transmission might choose programming where the torque converter or your shift patterns will be changed, and you might notice differences in when the torque converter will lock and unlock, and you might not be able to access all the different shift programs or gears until the temperature of the fluid comes up to operating temperature. Now, what the bypass does is it helps your fluid get up to temperature quicker by allowing cool fluid to bypass the cooler and not actually get cooled, bypass the cooler and go back through your system until it gets up to temperature. Now, the effect of the bypass in this cooler starts to reduce at 82 degrees, which means more fluid goes through the cooler and starts getting cooled down. And then at 96 degrees, the entire core is operational and you'll get the full cooling effect. So this is how this operates, and it's a really ingenious system because it's all passive, no moving parts, and just operates and works. And it is a great feature to have, especially if you're in cooler climates, because you don't want that transmission to get extra cooling, especially when it doesn't need it. So there you go, that's how the bypass works in the TrueCool cooler cores. To install the kit, the transmission cooler kit, the process involves first prepping the cooler, getting the hoses on and getting the brackets on. 2, organising access to the vehicle so you can actually install it in place. And we'll have a talk about what you need to do to make the job easy. We'll install the cooler, route the plumbing and hoses, connect that up, and the last thing we'll do is top up the fluid. So you're going to need, I'd say, about two hours to get it done. So let's get into the first step and prep the core. To get the job done, we need access to the front of the radiator, because that's where the cooler is going to be installed. We also need access to the pipes that go back to the transmission, which is sort of underneath here. Easiest way to do that is to actually take the bash plates off. We'll get these off first. Now these little clips here, a little trick to these is you just push them down and lift them up. So these are quite easy to remove, so we're going to push them all in. A little bit ASMR, so I'll stick them all down. And just gently pull this up. Make sure you don't flick these all over the place. I've done that more than once. And we'll get this cover off. Ooh. Okay. Off it comes. So we have access, but we're going to need to move this little strut here and also undo these horns. Let's remove this 10mm socket, we'll get this done. And then we also need to remove these 2 horns and just sort of hang them out of the way. This will make access to where the cooler sits much, much easier.
So these 2 points here are actually our top attachment points for the cooler. Okay, those are out of the way. Now that's done, let's go and get the bash plates off. I've got the car up on the hoist, makes it a lot easier, but if you don't, you'll still need to remove this front guard. All the hoses come down and are attached to here, so this is where we're going to attach our cooler. You might need to remove the splash guard to get access to the front guard, so we'll go ahead and do that. Those are the hoses we need to get access to. We need to do some preparation of the core. Now the kit comes with a bunch of hardware, hose tails and bits and pieces. We only really need the hose tails from there. Also the kit comes with some hose, but we also supply another little bit of hose. So we'll need both of those. Now first thing to do is to attach the brackets. Now note the orientation. We want the outlets, the hose tails here to face in this direction relative to the bracket, which we place underneath. So that's the bottom bracket and that's the top bracket. So just note that orientation and we'll get the bolts in. Now with the bolts, we want the bolts to come in from the back with the nylock nuts on the cooler side. This is to provide the maximum clearance to the radiator. So we'll go and do that. These are nice nylock flange nuts. I'll just get that in place and I'll show you again so you confirm the orientation. Okay, I haven't tightened it up yet, but I'll show you there. There's a little tab on the bottom and the 2 M8 mounting points that go to where the horn is attached. And then we have the inlet and outlet facing out the side here. So I'll go ahead and tighten that. Just check that. Okay, we've got all those bolts tightened up. Now the next thing we want to do is grab a couple of hose tail clamps. There should be 4 in this kit, but we need 2 here. We'll grab the other ones later from when we connect it to the vehicle. Get these dust caps off. Now we want to attach the hoses in place first. Okay. Now we want to tighten that in place. Make sure it's all the way home. It's looking good. Just move that down a little. Okay. There, you got all those in place. Now I'll just show you this little bit here as well. There's a little tiny sort of detail here where we can put a cable tie later to do some cable management. So I'll show you that later once we install it on the vehicle. We've got this little bracket here. This is for a bit of hose management. So the hose is going to come from over here, across here and down. We've got these 2 notches here to attach cable ties to. Now the position of this bracket goes behind this bracket that holds the aircon line in. So what we'll do is we'll take this M6 bolt off that I've pre-loosened and we'll just tuck it in under there. Now note the orientation, the little notch on the top. You'll know if you got it wrong because you won't have enough room to put the cable ties on. I'll tighten it in place and just, you can see there's enough room for a cable tie there and a cable tie there, and that allows that hose to come around at 90 degrees and gives you something to attach the hose to. So I'm just going to tighten that up and then we can start installing the cooler. What we have here is a demonstration to show the direction of the fluid flow into the cooler that goes into the radiator. Now you don't have to do this to install the cooler. So what I have here is this is the original hose that was connected to the top outlet or top hose in the radiator cooler. I've unhooked that, hooked it up to a clear bit of hose and then rehooked it up back into the radiator cooler. So when I start the motor, you should be able to see the direction of the flow. So we'll go do that now. We'll start it up now. And you can see the direction. We have our cooler with brackets and hoses attached. Now we're going to feed the hose through. Now this top hose needs to come up and underneath this cross member, and the bottom hose needs to go behind this cross member. So I'll just run the hose through first. Top one. It's the top hose. Bottom hose goes behind that cross member and just underneath the thermofan. And as you pull it through, you can position the cooler and it'll tuck inside there. There you go. Now we'll replace the horns while we're at it. One horn, two horns. So we reuse the M8 bolts that we had originally. The other one, and that's why we want to put the hoses on first, because access is a bit hard to get to the hose clamps once it's installed. As you can see, it's tucked away nicely in there. And down the bottom, an M6 goes into the lower cross member. And get that all tightened up, and then we'll have a look at the hose management. We've got the cooler in place. Now we're going to have a look at the lower hose, and now it comes across underneath this fan onto this bracket here and does a 90-degree. So what I'll do is I'll just pass this hose down first, and that's what it's going to do. So grab a couple cable ties. Top one first. Make sure you get it around that little notch, and then another one down the bottom. And we'll just make sure we get a nice bend around it before we tighten everything up. So that's sitting nicely there. So I'll tighten that one, I'll tighten that one. And there you go. Got a nice bend there, and we'll go and route the hose underneath and back up again. So I'll just trim those off first before we do that. And all done. So we passed the hose underneath the cross member, the top hose, and it popped out here. We're just going to push it down and tidy it up underneath this, and it should tuck in underneath there, and you should be able to attach it to this loom here with a cable tie just to tidy that up and hold it in place. Just tuck that in there and get that in place. Once the coolers are installed, we're actually going to remove this original hose here. But before we can do that, we need to unclip it, because what we can do is once we unclip this hose, we can use these clips to hold our hoses, our new hoses. This clip here, there's one on the top, there's one down the bottom. Use a little flat screwdriver and just unclip it there. You can see that it's sort of opened up. What I'll do now is I'll just get that hose out of the way, just like that. And before I unhook anything, because as soon as I unhook stuff, I'm going to get oil everywhere, we'll go and unclip the bottom one, and then we'll attach our hoses. Now the bottom clip here actually holds both hoses in place, the inlet and the outlet. We need to unclip that so we can remove this hose here, the one I'm wiggling. So I found the easiest way to do it, use a screwdriver, just there you go, unclipped. So it's just got a barb there, and yeah, that's unclipped there now. So back to the top, unhook the hose and pull it down, but we'll block it off so it doesn't leak everywhere. We've unclipped the top and the bottom. Now we're ready to remove this hose. So get a pair of pliers, unclip that. What I'm going to do is put a bolt in place. just so that it doesn't leak everywhere when I pull this hose down. And then when I'm ready, I'll take that off. So that's just a way to keep your workspace a bit tidier. And then we should be able to pull this hose all the way down, but the easiest way to do that is to go from the bottom. I've already removed this, but there's a bracket halfway up the radiator that holds this little connector. And because it's going to be so hard to attach to there, we're going to attach down the bottom here to the pipe that goes directly to the transmission. So this is held in place with a little M6 bolt. And it's all the way up there, so you need to get your hands up there and loosen this off. And then we can pull this whole hose down. And this was the hose that was at the top there that we blocked off. And because we blocked it off, we're not covering ourselves in oil. And we'll just leave that here while we run all our other hoses. And we'll connect that up at the last minute so that we're not dripping oil everywhere. This here is the hose that comes from the bottom of the new cooler. And that came from that cable management little bracket there. And then we pass it through over the top of the cross member, the lower cross member, and underneath the radiator. What we're doing at the moment is we're just passing this up to the top. Now that that hose is out of the way, we can actually use that clip that we unclipped and clip it back in place and pass it up through the top. And then what we'll do, we'll go up to the top and hook it in. We're back up to the top again, and we've fed the hose up through, and now we just need to fish it out, and that's the hose there. And we can pass it through that clip there, and that's where it'll attach. But I won't cut it to length just yet because we're going to fill the cooler from here. So you could temporarily just put it on while we're up here. I'll just leave that. It's not going to leak anywhere, so we've got it in position. We've got the hose from the top of the cooler. We're going to pass this down. So this is going to attach to the metal pipe that goes back to the transmission. So we've got that down there, and what we'll do is we'll go and tidy up and secure all the hoses before we cut them to length and terminate them. So we got the top and bottom hoses pretty much where we need them. So what we want to do now is we want to just secure all the hoses, make sure they're not rubbing on any sharp edges or anything like that. So I'll start with the bottom hose first. This was the bottom hose from the cooler that came through that 90 degrees and through this gap on the top of the lower cross member. Now this is going up through the clamps that we undid, and that looks pretty good. So I'll cable tie it off here so that it doesn't move. So just make sure everything's clear. Looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Now let's push the rest of the slack up. Now that one's in place. I'll just clip this off. We got the hose coming from the top, and just having a look up through the gap there, making sure that it's coming down nice and neatly. And what I'll do is I'll cable tie it around there, because this hose needs to actually attach to this metal hose that comes back, which is this hose that we unhooked. So we don't need this anymore. You can keep that hose, so if you ever want to put it back to original, you can. So I'll go ahead and I'll tie that in place, and then that way I can actually cut that to length. Okay, so we're happy with how the hoses are sitting up in there. That looks pretty good. I'll just tighten that off, and I'll go get a knife and I'll cut that back. Okay, while we're down here, we'll hook this up, and then we can go up to the top and finish it off. The next step could be a little bit messy, but we're ready for it. Now, don't make the mistake of forgetting to put the hose clamp on, so I'm going to put the hose clamp on first. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to quickly unhook that and push this hose onto that so we don't lose too much fluid. Going to need a set of pliers, and I've got a rag. What I'll do is I'll move this hose clamp first, and let's do the whole switcheroo. See if I can do this without spilling too much oil. Of course, it's nice and tight. I just need to break the seal a bit. top one came off easy. Ah, here we go. Whoop, whoop, really, that came off quick. Okay. So that's all my stuff, and I'll just do the whole switcheroo. Oh, nothing came out. Well, that was an anticlimax. Now, hold on, it's dripping. There you go. Yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought. Last time I did it, it leaked everywhere. Okay, let's finish off our work down below and get that clamp on there. Okay, it's all good. Clean up. But there you go. So, hose is gone. Keep that for later. The lower section's all done. Now we just need to hook up the top. So I'm just going to position that and cut that hose to length. That looks pretty good right there. Now we're actually not going to hook it up just yet. But again, let's remember to put the hose clamp on. Hose clamp's on. So that'll go on there, but what we'll do now is this is the easiest time to top up the fluid. So we're going to put 300 ml of trans fluid in there and then hook it all up and then test for leaks. Before we top up the transmission oil, good chance to show you the difference between old oil and new oil. So there's a little bit of oil left in this. Let's see if I can get it out without spilling it. So that's the oil that was in the car. So a nice brown color, and this is fresh transmission cooler oil. So you can see the difference there. This car's done 90,000 Ks. So old oil, new oil. And this oil here smells a bit burnt. Yum. Time to top up the fluid. I'm going to use a little funnel. Don't tell my wife this. This came from the kitchen, but I'll wash it up. Then I'm going to use a syringe because I've got the sort of milliliter marks on there, so I'll know how much. But you could always use a measuring jug or something along those lines. So we'll put the oil in, and I'll top that up with a 300 ml of transmission fluid. It's going in, but slowly. So I'm going to need 4 of these syringes to get my 300 ml. Maybe I should have stolen the measuring jug out of the kitchen as well. It would have been quicker. Now, instead of topping up the fluid, you might want to consider just replacing the fluid and starting from fresh again. Often, a lot of our customers do that. We're done here. This one took a little bit less than 300 ml to fill up. So just fill it up until you can't get any more in. Should be around about the 200 to 300 mils of extra fluid. Okay, I'll get this funnel out. Ooh. And hook it up. Get that rag. Sure Linda won't notice that funnel got dirty. Okay. Get that hose up there and get the screwdriver and tighten that hose clamp up. Now that the plumbing's done, we'll go and make sure all the nuts and bolts are tightened up. Okay, another cable tie here will help hold the hoses in place. So it's looking good. There you go. At the top of this cooler here, we've got some wiring that needs to go over the top of the cooler. So what we've done, we've actually folded a little bit of steel over the top so it doesn't rub through, and we've allowed some provision for a cable tie to stop the cable moving around. This is the little cable management notch for the cable tie in the top of the cooler. Just easier to see it out of the vehicle. So cable tie goes underneath there and through there, and this is a bit of hose, but in the car it's actually a wiring loom, so that holds in place there. So it goes into those little notches there, like that, and allows you to cable tie that in place. Okay, just need to get the cable tie into that slot, and just because my fingers are too small. Okay, so just trim that off. So that's held in place, stop it from chafing. Now that that's done, let's go ahead and tighten up all the bolts. We've got the M8s up here and the M6 down the bottom. We are pretty much done. So before we put everything back, before we put the bash plates and the covers back, we will check for leaks. We're going to check our work and look for leaks. Way to do that is turn the car on. So let's start up the car. Okay, let's start from the top here. So the oil comes out of the radiator cooler. So check all the connections, the hose clamp there, no leaks. Follow it around, make sure the connections to the cooler are good, no leaks. That's looking pretty good. And then follow that around and look at your connections underneath. And that one looks nice and dry as well. So now that we're happy that we've got no leaks, let's put it all back together. Covers, the bash plate. Now the other good thing about putting a cooler in is you actually increase the total cooling capacity of your vehicle. So it helps keep your engine cooler as well, not just your transmission. And we're almost done. Get the bash plate on. Call it a day. And there you have it. The cooler kit's installed. We've got it all back together. Now we've gone through our kit and some of the differences in our cooler core. We've gone through how to install it and some of the tips and tricks on how to get that in. So quite achievable as a DIY project. Now if you need any more information, check out the website.